So let's get our bearings here domestically. What do our neighbors believe? What do many people in this room very likely believe? Well, 22% of Americans claim to be certain that Jesus is going to return to earth sometime in the next 50 years. Another 22% believe he probably will do so. This is 44% of the electorate. This is 150 million people in our country. 150 million people believe that a historical figure, who incidentally was crucified 2,000 years ago, is going to come out of the sky like a superhero and wield his magic powers over the face of the earth, kill all the bad people, and save the day sometime in the next 50 years. Now, this belief, of course, entails other beliefs. It's no accident that 44% of Americans also believe that we were created from dust sometime in the last 10,000 years with no genetic precursors. 44% of Americans want us to stop teaching our children about the biological fact of evolution. 62% actually want us to teach creationism in schools, but 44% want only creationism. 44% of Americans also believe that the creator of the universe literally gave the land of Israel to the Jews. This is God as an omniscient real estate broker. So one thing I argue in my book is that we are building a civilization of ignorance. And it's not just that we're in danger of losing our technological edge to China, or that medical research may be impeded, although those things undoubtedly are happening. Beliefs of this sort have geopolitical consequences. 44% of Americans, if they turned on their television tomorrow morning and saw that a mushroom cloud had replaced Jerusalem or New York, would see a silver lining in that cloud, because the cloud would be a portent that the best thing that is ever going to happen is about to happen, the return of Christ. And this is not, these people not only elect our congressmen and our presidents, they get elected as our congressmen and presidents. We are not talking about the fringes of society. We are quite literally talking about the fringes of the Oval Office, if not its present occupant. So one thing I argue is that this should be terrifying to us. The idea that there's only 50 years left, the idea that there may only be 50 years left, this is perfectly maladaptive. Bad ideas don't get much worse than this. This is perfectly hostile to creating a sustainable future for ourselves, environmentally, even economically. Some of you probably remember the story about James Watt, Reagan's first Secretary of the Interior, who said in testimony before Congress, "When the last tree is felled, Christ will return." As the Secretary of the Interior. Now, most secularists didn't know what to make of this comment, but the devout certainly did. Reagan is reported to have brought Jerry Falwell into his National Security Council briefings. He had Hal Lindsey, a religious lunatic of the highest order, lecture to the Pentagon about the implications of Bible prophecy for nuclear war with the Soviet Union. So what is the problem with taking things on faith? Well, there are two, and the first should be very obvious. If faith is what you have to go on, if faith is the link between your beliefs and the world at large, your beliefs are very likely to be wrong. Beliefs can be right or wrong. If you believe you can fly, that belief is only true if indeed you can fly. Somebody who thinks he can fly and is wrong about it will eventually discover there's a problem with his view of the world. Faith does not offer a strong link between our beliefs and actual states of the world. And this is not an accident, because it is what we rely on when no such links exist. It is what we rely on when the reasons are not there, when the sensory evidence is not there. But there's another problem with faith, and it occurs between people and between societies. You see, we have a choice. We have two options as human beings. We have a choice between conversation and war. That's it. Conversation and violence. And faith is a conversation stopper. The only thing that guarantees an open-ended collaboration among human beings, the only thing that guarantees that this project is truly open-ended, is a willingness to have our beliefs and behaviors modified by the power of conversation. It should be clear. What else could do it? What else could guarantee that our future together of collaboration is actually open-ended? We have a consensual space where we continually revise our description of the world. New data comes in, new arguments come in. Now, failing that, when the stakes are high, we just start clubbing each other over the heads. If there's nothing that a devout Muslim and a devout Christian can say to one another that will put their beliefs about the world in check, that will make them mutually susceptible to the power of conversation, then when the stakes are high, there's nothing to appeal to but force. So now what is it that most people take on faith? There really is this central claim that certain books are unique. Generally, the claim is certain books were written or dictated by God. Among moderates, it may be certain books may have been dictated by God. More moderate still, certain books were written by the wisest people who ever lived, and we can't improve on them. Whatever the claim, it leads certain books to be uniquely venerated. Now the question is, do the contents of these books warrant this? No. Consider the Bible as a source of moral instruction. The Bible is undoubtedly a great work of literature, but consider it as a moral document. Consider books like Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Exodus and 2 Samuel. As moral documents, these are diabolical books. These texts tell us to kill people for all manner of infraction. To kill your children for talking back to you. You kill people who work on the Sabbath. You kill people who have homosexual sex, men at any rate. You kill people for adultery. You kill people for wizardry. The list is long and preposterous. Now, most Christians and Jews imagine that somehow these admonishments were appropriate to the time, that the Canaanites were so ill-behaved that a prescription like kill your children if they talk back to you was an improvement over the status quo. This is ludicrous. This is historically ludicrous. At the exact same moment in history, people like Mahavira, the founder of Jainism, an Indian religion, and Buddha, incidentally, they were preaching highly moral doctrines, too moral. Mahavira, Jainism is a doctrine of utter nonviolence. His contemporary in the Old Testament, Elijah, was running around killing the prophets of Baal for their wayward beliefs. These are different moral visions. It was possible back then to realize you shouldn't kill your children for talking back to you. Now here I violated another taboo, or that second taboo I mentioned earlier. It is taboo to notice that our religions are actually different. Our religions are not all equally wise. They're not teaching exactly the same thing on every point, and where they do teach the same thing, they don't teach it equally well. Now let's linger on this supposed link between Scripture and morality, because it's often claimed that unless we think one of our books was actually written by the creator of the universe, we will just be at sea morally. We will be practicing cannibalism and having sex with our children. There is no evidence for this. Let's consider a moral question that is solved, at least in the civilized world. Consider slavery. We can all agree that slavery was an abomination. Thomas Jefferson, as good as that man was, he would have been a better person if he had freed his slaves. Absolutely. Anyone who thinks that slavery, in moral terms, still may have something going for it, has been completely marginalized in our society. Well, what sort of instruction do we get from the Bible on the subject of slavery? The creator of the universe clearly expects us to keep slaves. This is true in the Old Testament. This is true in the New Testament. Jesus clearly expects us to keep slaves. Many Christians imagine that Jesus has repudiated or somehow rescinded all of Old Testament law. This is untrue. I can assure you that the ecclesiastics who were burning heretics for centuries in Europe had read all of the New Testament. They found some rationale for their actions. But on the subject of slavery, 1 Timothy 6, the New Testament, admonishes slaves to serve their masters well. Serve your believing masters all the better, and thereby partake in their virtue. So if we think this book was written by the creator of the universe, or if we think this book is somehow, even if written by men, and unsurpassable in moral terms, we should own other human beings and make them work for us. The only restraint that God urges upon us on this subject is not to beat them so badly that we knock out their eyes or their teeth. But we can surely beat them. They're slaves, after all. We can beat it. We should beat our children, incidentally. Proverbs 23 says, "Do not withhold correction from the child." If you beat him with a rod, he will not die. If you beat him with a rod, you will save his soul from hell. Now, I think it should go without saying that any person in 21st century America who's beating his kids with a rod is a bad parent. But if you believe this is the best book on the planet in moral terms, that's the only kind of parent you should be. So there's a basic problem here. If we hold these books aside from the rest of the human conversation, make them immune to criticism, if they are uniquely wise, then we are at the mercy of their contents. And the problem is exquisitely acute in the Muslim world now, because there really are doctrines in mainstream Islam that are incompatible with civil society, specifically the doctrines of martyrdom and jihad. These are deal breakers. There is no possible future in which aspiring martyrs are going to make good neighbors for us. Now, if you think, and being moderates, you're very likely to think this, if you think that Muslim violence is really just a matter of politics, if you think it's the product of the history of oppression and the lack of economic opportunity, you should ask yourselves why we don't see Tibetan Buddhist suicide bombers. The Tibetans have suffered an occupation every bit as brutal and far more cynical than any occupation that has been visited upon the Muslim world. Many people believe that 1.2, 1.3 million Tibetans have died as a result of the Chinese occupation. We don't see throngs of Tibetans calling for the deaths of Chinese non-combatants. We don't see Tibetan Buddhist suicide bombers blowing up Chinese children in their schools. What we do see are Tibetan monks and nuns who have spent decades in Chinese prisons being tortured, who come out and say things like, "My greatest fear while in prison was that the pain of torture would cause me to lose the strength of my compassion, and I would start to hate my torturers." Now, find me a Muslim who, after decades of being tortured with an electric cattle prod in an Israeli jail, comes out speaking that way, and I will eat my book. I'm serious. It is unthinkable, given what Muslims believe. Now, let me be very clear about this. I am not talking about an ethnicity. I'm not talking about Arabs. I'm talking about the logical entailments of the doctrine of Islam. I'm talking about John Walker Lind, the white guy from Marin who went to fight with the Taliban. Now, we may question the wisdom and the desirability of the Buddhist response, this emphasis on compassion. Now, I'm absolutely open to argument on this subject, and if you read my book, you'll discover I'm not a pacifist. But what I'm not open to argument on is this taboo that prevents us from noticing the difference between a doctrine of compassion and a doctrine of jihad. The truth is, in the Muslim world, we even see people who haven't suffered much of anything, willing to spend their lives trying to figure out how to kill as many non-combatants as possible. Osama bin Laden is really the reductio ad absurdum of any argument that suggests that you need to be insane or poor or the victim of oppression to take up jihad. So this is an extraordinary circumstance we're in. We have certain religious beliefs leading to the most nihilistic violence. What could be more nihilistic than blowing yourself up in a crowd of children and having your mother approve of it? This is the situation we're in. Now, I really want to nail this down because many of you are very likely still to believe, no, Islam is a religion of peace. These are economic and political issues. This is a result of the misadventures of American foreign policy. America has a tremendous amount to apologize for in the world. There is no doubt. But this is a separate issue. Yes, they're related, but this is a separate issue. There is no possibility that we will ever have a problem with Jain suicide bombers. Insofar as a Jain becomes more and more religious, even more and more deranged by his religious dogmas, he will become less and less violent. The doctrine of Jainism is a doctrine of total pacifism. Jains drink every sip of water, observant Jains drink every sip of water through cheesecloth so that they won't swallow a bug. They sweep the path upon which they walk so that they won't step on ants. They can scarcely figure out how to live in this world. They're so nonviolent. So if you don't think religion is the difference that makes a difference, you have to explain the Jains. So where does that leave us? We have the situation where religious beliefs are inevitably dividing one community from another because they're incompatible. We have religious beliefs and the sheer divisions among communities leading to violence. And the most reasonable people in our societies in the West, moderates and secularists, are constrained by taboos from talking about this. We have really medieval superstitions deciding social policy in 21st century America. And what I argue in my book is that we cannot sufficiently criticize the encroach of medievalism and the spread of fundamentalism because of the lip service we pay to faith, because of the validity we accord it in our discourse. There's no one in the White House press corps who can stand up when the president says something like, "We need common sense judges," I'm quoting now, "we need common sense judges who realize that our rights are derived from God. And these are the kinds of judges I plan to put on the bench." No one in the White House press corps can stand up and say, "Mr. President, how is that any different from needing common sense judges who understand that our rights are derived from Poseidon or Zeus?" Okay, that would be the last question a journalist ever asks. And needless to say, we cannot possibly elect a president who openly doubts the existence of God, openly doubts the existence of a personal God who can hear our prayers, who takes an interest in our affairs. 70% of Americans believe that it is important to have a president who is strongly religious. Over 50% of Americans claim to find atheists highly disagreeable. Now, I think we can all agree that if anyone was dying on account of Zeus, if people were organizing their lives around different dogmas about Mount Olympus, if books were being written trying to explain and constrain science in light of the Iliad and the Odyssey, this would be an obscene misuse of human life. But it's not like someone figured out in the 3rd century that Zeus doesn't exist, but the biblical God does. That's not a discovery that anyone made. This is the situation we are in. People are dying for an imaginary God, and we are not talking about it. You can read the newspaper for a year and not be reminded that the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians is a religious conflict. It is always framed as a conflict over land. It is only about land because the religious beliefs are incompatible. The theological claims on the real estate are incompatible. And moderates like yourselves are uniquely unable to appreciate the link between religious dogma and violence. You are blinded by your own moderation. When the jihadi looks into the video camera and says, "We love death more than the infidel loves life," and then blows himself up, the religious dogmatists on our side, the Jerry Falwells of the world, they have no problem understanding that he was being quite candid. He really did have the courage of his convictions. This was not propaganda. He went to paradise, or so he thought. It turns out he has the wrong religion. But he was after the 72 virgins. So one thing I argue in my book is that it's time we took these people at their word. They're telling us what they believe. And I don't know how many architects and mechanical engineers need to hit the wall at 400 miles an hour before we take them at their word. So what is the alternative to religious faith? Now, there are two answers to this. The first answer is it's the wrong question to ask. Either God exists or he doesn't. If he doesn't exist, then we would be better off not believing in him. And what is the alternative to a belief in Santa Claus? The answer really is nothing. Now, it's not that a belief in Santa Claus was doing nothing for a child. A child is entranced and consoled and interested and happy that Santa Claus exists. You take the belief away, you've taken something away. You haven't replaced it with something. But whatever conspired to make the belief untenable, perhaps he saw that it was his parents wrapping the presents, the belief disappears, and we all know that no one wants to be the last kid in class who believes in Santa Claus. And imagine how untenable the position of a child would be if he claimed not to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. He claimed to have found a moderate position on Santa Claus, and he could keep the sleigh and the elves, but jettison the guy in the suit. So the first answer to the question, what are the alternatives to faith? There don't have to be alternatives. If these beliefs are false, if they're untenable, we can relinquish them, as many countries in Western Europe have done. Only 10% of Swedes, 10 to 15%, are believers of the sort we recognize in the States. Incidentally, 83% of Americans believe that Jesus literally rose from the dead. Now, again, it may seem insane, it may seem counterproductive, it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, to just say we can relinquish these beliefs without an alternative. But let me remind you about how easy it is to see the wisdom of this when we simply change the word God to Zeus. No one is feeling that maybe we should hold on to Zeus. When we woke up the day after Christmas and turned on our televisions and saw that a killing wall of water had swept multitudes off the beaches of 12 countries, nobody said, I think maybe we should be praying to Poseidon. Let's just cover our bases. But another way of answering this question is that, yes, clearly there are alternatives to faith. Whatever our spiritual possibilities are, they have to transcend culture and tradition. Whatever is true ultimately transcends culture and tradition. There is a very good reason why we don't talk about Christian physics or Muslim algebra, though the Christians invented physics as we know it, as we know the Jews brought it to the next level, but we don't talk about the cultural context in which these disciplines arose, because there really is there. They really are legitimate domains of knowledge that transcend culture. An experiment done in Los Angeles is going to work just like an experiment done in Baghdad if, in fact, it really is teasing out some real truth about the nature of the world. Now, contemplatives in a variety of religious traditions have looked into the connection between how we use our attention and human happiness, how we behave among others, ethics and human happiness. There's a lot of wisdom in our religious traditions on these subjects, but invariably, this testimony is mingled with dogma. There's no doubt that doing the Jesus prayer for 18 hours a day is going to radically transform your moment-to-moment experience of the world, very likely for the better. A Christian doing this practice will interpret these changes, these positive changes, as a confirmation of Christian dogma, as a confirmation of the idea that Jesus really was the Son of God, for instance. Now, it seems to me that there's a cure for this kind of provincialism. You only have to read about the identical experiences of Hindus to realize that the conclusion that Jesus is the Son of God is not the best interpretation of the data, even of your own experience as a Christian. So the challenge for us, as I see it, is to find ways for talking about our deepest personal concerns, about the inevitability of death, about the inevitability of human suffering, about whatever we can do to transcend suffering, deepen communities, use ritual, to talk about all of this in terms that don't demand belief in anything on insufficient evidence, because reason and evidence are our only link to one another. A fundamental openness to evidence is the only thing that guarantees the human conversation is truly open-ended. And that said, I'd like to thank you for listening to my side of it. Thank you very much.
We're going to ask those who wish to ask questions to line up behind the microphone here. And I'd like to begin, and then Reverend Swope of IUCC will be asking a question, and then we really invite everyone here to comment. Your critique of religion was chillingly clear, very precise. I don't think anyone would doubt that most of it is true. I was thinking that one line you used was even more provocative than your provocative title for your book. You said, people are dying because of a belief in an imaginary God. That would have been a more provocative title for the book. You spoke about religious moderates. That's about as far as you took it to the left. I would dare say that most of us in this room are religious liberals. And think, most of us, we think of God, the term God, I don't want to say most because I don't know everybody in the room, but many of us think of God, that term is a metaphor for a force or power inside people that lead them to goodness, to being caring and loving people, as a path towards fulfillment, self-actualization, altruism. That's how God or godliness works through us. Right? And we don't think of texts as coming from God, but rather being human products where human beings wrote those texts asserting what they thought was the highest and truest in their era. But for us, the texts raise questions, not give answers. We don't think of the Torah as a giant Ouija board that we open up and it has answers. So my question for you is, what should liberal religionists do in the face of these alarming numbers, statistics you quoted about the number of religious fundamentalists and some truly scary beliefs about reality, what should liberal Jews and Christians and people of other faiths do to combat that level of what I would call spiritual ignorance? It might be religious faith, but it's spiritual and intellectual ignorance.
Can you hear me for this one? Really what I'm arguing for, I'm arguing for a kind of intolerance. There's no way around it, but it is conversational intolerance. I'm arguing for new rules of conversation. This is not the intolerance that gave us the Gulag in the former Soviet Union. I'm not advocating that people be jailed for believing the wrong thing about God, but I'm arguing that the rules that apply in every other area of our lives apply on matters of faith, apply on matters of spirituality and ethics and the kinds of claims people make under the aegis of religion. Take one example, stem cell research. Now, you can be a senator standing on the floor of the Senate saying things like, God creates life, man should not meddle in it. End of argument. That's the ethical argument. As I said, faith is a conversation stopper. As long as you don't have to give real reason and real arguments for your position, then the sky's the limit. You can stand in the way of what is undoubtedly one of the most promising lines in biology of research as far as generating medical therapies. And you can stand there smugly and stupidly as a college-educated politician and undoubtedly not lose any sleep over it. It's not that these people are sinister. They have their beliefs, but their beliefs are arising in a context that is not criticizing them, that is not putting them to the kinds of challenges that we put beliefs in any other area of our lives. So the stem cell research conversation should go more like this. We should talk about what these human embryos that will be destroyed in stem cell research really are. A human blastocyst, a 3-day-old embryo, is a collection of 150 cells. That may sound like a lot of cells. There are 100,000 cells in the brain of a fly. We're talking about 150 cells arranged in a sphere without any nervous system. This collection of cells is not discernibly human in any way apart from its genome. And the interests of these cells are being used to trump, really, the interests of little girls with diabetes and men and women with Parkinson's disease, people with full body burns, and a score of other conditions that could very likely be remediated if stem cell research proceeded completely without hindrance. Now, stem cell research is not outlawed, as you know, it's just being impeded by lack of funding. But 35% of Americans want it outlawed. 35% of Americans, you can raise the bar as high as you want on the side of benefit. No matter what possible benefit we could get from stem cell research, those are souls. Those blastocysts are fully ensouled. And souls are equivalent. So what I'm arguing is that religious moderates can't stand for this discourse. And I think it's a very difficult game to play as a religious moderate, because as long as you want to dignify the claim that it makes sense to organize your life around the Bible, say, because it really is such a good book, uniquely inscribed in our tradition, uniquely wise, then you really have very little purchase on a criticism of the people who are going to take the Bible far more literally. Because the Bible doesn't say, don't take me literally on this. God doesn't say, when you get to the New World and you develop your 3 branches of government, you can jettison all the barbarism I talked about in Leviticus.